occasion, when Jesus was going to the home of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. And all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Friends, this is the gospel of the Lord Jesus. Thanks be to God. The passage we've just shared from Luke, it is just so Jesus-like, isn't it? Doesn't it just kind of feel like Jesus? Having such humility and love that you would place the needs of others who may not always get the attention or the fame or the success or even the breaks that you do, putting them ahead of yourself at the banquet table, at the checkout line at Whole Foods, at the side entry to rush hour traffic when you're running very late. I remember reading this passage a few years ago. I remember it was a time I was feeling very optimistic and renewed, and we were on a quick road trip vacation down Interstate 95 to Virginia from Philadelphia. Anna Marie and I just did that on vacation as we were kind of renewing ourselves to come here. I must share with you, people have been helping us to get renewed for our experience here, because before I even left my last interim, I was given the official Bucky Badger hat. And although I'm wearing the appropriate white shirt and tie for right now, also this and my University of Wisconsin red golf shirt will also be on display during the picnic, as will the Green Bay Packers beach towel. And so this brought to mind a previous trip down the interstate to Virginia. And on that trip, I was intent that I was going to be that person that Jesus described. I was going to be gracious. I was going to be welcoming. I was going to put others first in everything. That is until I saw an electronic sign flashing this message of a 6-mile backup due to an accident. And the traffic was narrowing from 4 lanes down to 2 lanes. It said road work construction. Was there anyone that we could observe constructing? No. Isn't that interesting? Somehow, on that highway, suddenly Christian virtue was in very, very short supply. But not for me, not for me. I even gave ground to several merging cars as a Christian example to the upcoming SUV, which nearly crushed my door in. And it was by a driver who very intentionally did not even turn his head to look at me. You know that kind of intentional non-look? Yeah, they know they did it, but they're not going to look at you. Well, if they're going to act that way, then I'm not going to give ground either. Luckily, I had in the car a voice of reason, if not self-preservation. And with Henri's help, I cooled down enough to merge a few cars later, starting to hum that old Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young song, "You who are on the road must have a code you can live by. Teach your children well." Well, as we're approaching now the startup of a new, a lot of things, church, school, return of students to the university, and people coming back from vacation, and interim period here for Christ Church, I've been thinking a lot about the way that we act toward others as a visible sermonette to the next generations who will lead our church and our churches. Even though they may not totally screen us out when they become teenagers, in truth, they never really do screen us out. They're watching. They're watching what it is that we do, how we live out what we profess, how much faith really matters to us in real time. And the same can be said for those for whom faith and spirituality and religion may be for them a new thing. They are watching. So we are amazingly fortunate to have someone like Jesus who knows our humanness in a way that only an everyday Savior could, who is also one with our Creator, that he could know us. Jesus saw how people chose places of honor, getting momentary attention and fame, while lasting fame really only comes to those who choose to place love of neighbor over love of self. Jesus also knew how hard it is for us to always consistently do that. So he showed us even to the point of loving and forgiving those who persecuted him the most. And so we might think that this sermon is a sermon about us, about how we will train ourselves and embrace virtues and set a fine example. But what if this sermon is not specifically about us, but is about them, about learning to see and to embrace those who are on the lowly scale as equal to ourselves, putting them first, treating them as our honored friends? It sounds so good, it sounds so Jesus-like, but it is easier said than functionally accomplished. So how do we put that into practice? Well, it may sound simple, but perhaps by practicing it. Here's a wonderful example. I used to run regularly, like run on the road. And hopefully I'm going to take that up again any day now. Any day now. But because of that past pursuit, I've always been deeply moved by stories like this one. See, a number of years ago, there was a man named Bill Broadhurst who entered a race. He entered a Pepsi Challenge 10,000-meter road race in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, 10 years before that, Bill had undergone surgery for an aneurysm in his brain, and the surgery had left him partially paralyzed on the left side. But on this misty morning, an impaired Bill Broadhurst stood with 1,200 agile runners at a starting line. The gun sounded, the crowd surged forward, and Bill bravely threw his left leg forward and pivoted on it with his right foot hitting the pavement, and thus began his run. By the time he had taken only a few steps forward, the participants were almost out of sight, and his slow cadence almost seemed to mock him while others ran away. Steam poured down his face, pain pierced his ankle, but he kept on going, one foot in front of the other, over and again. It was 6 miles, 10,000 meters, 2 hours and 29 minutes later that Bill Broadhurst reached that finish line. And as he crossed it, slowly but triumphantly, he was approached by a man from the small group of bystanders still hanging around, and he immediately recognized who the man was. It was the world-class marathon runner, Bill Rodgers, who had just won that 10,000-meter race. And Bill Rodgers walked up to him, and he said, "Here," as he put his just won medal around Bill's neck, "you worked so much harder for this than I have." Now, maybe it's just my overly optimistic side when not on interstate traffic, but I think that for Bill Rodgers and for Bill Broadhurst, these two Bills with that exchange of a medal, that was the biggest victory of the day. It was two runners who were connecting on a level in a way that only they could truly ever understand. What a great moment in life it can be. Selfless affirmation of the humanity of another. Whether it's religiously based or not, I think God smiles when something like that happens. I often like to focus on the Christian church, particularly our Presbyterian expression of it, as being covenant community. Covenant's a fancy word for an agreement, an understanding, to which we're willing to make public and to which we are deeply committed, a covenant. But a covenant is more than about words. It's about visible actions. And so each and every one of us has a responsibility to show others what it is that Jesus is talking about, what he is living out, what he's passing on to his disciples. And years from now, it is what we do today that will largely determine how our children and our teens and our college students and our friends and peers and those new to faith and our world are going to view faith, hope, love, and church. I realize what a tall order that seems to be. We all know that much of the young generation, and by young generation I mean anyone one day less old than me. Well, okay, I'll focus it down to the emerging adult generations. That they often view religion as just a bunch of rules and rituals and buildings and dated worldviews. They may even think of judgmentalism rather than acceptance and grace. But in a sermon to the first Christians, the letter to the Hebrews says, "Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us," just like Bill Broadhurst. And so our task and our opportunity to teach our children well is for us to run that race with deep, joyful knowledge that in this Christian race, winning is about being a participant, not about leaving others behind, but by putting others ahead. And that truly makes God smile. And that smile makes all the difference in this life. I've kept for a long time an anonymous poem that reminds me of what it is that we intend each time we launch a new church year in the fall, or each time we baptize a baby or a teen or an adult, each time we go on a mission trip, each time we come to the Lord's table. The poem's called "What Shall We Give to the Children?" The open sky, the brown earth, the leafy trees, the golden sand, the blue water, the stars in their courses, and the awareness of these, bird songs, butterflies, clouds and rainbows, sunlight, moonlight, firelight. A large hand reaching for a small hand, impromptu praise, an unexpected kiss, a straight answer, a glisten of enthusiasm, a sense of wonder, long days to be merry in, and nights without fear. And the memory of all these we shall give to the children. Friends, Jesus tells us and shows us how to do all of those things. And so in the midst of God's gracious and loving people in a hurting and longing world, a holy humility goes a long, long way. And so may it be so for us, Presbyterians in Madison, Wisconsin. Let us be in prayer.